Hello, I'm Dominic Hobson, co-founder of Future of Finance. My guest today is Sarah Williams-Gardner, CEO of FinTech Wales, the champion of fintechs and financial services in Wales. After leaving IBM, Sarah became one of the founders of Starling Bank, a success story for digital banking in general and for digital banking in Wales in particular. Sarah joined FinTech Wales in November last year. Hello, Sarah. Congratulations on the new role and thanks for joining us.
Lovely to be here, Dominic. Thank you for having me, and thank you for the congratulations. It feels like I've been here a while now.
And tell me, as you look back at your time at Starling and at IBM and why you took this job, what would you say motivates you to get out of bed in the morning and go to work?
What motivates me is working with great people and having the opportunity to make a difference, a small difference. I'm really motivated by technology and technology being used for good. I've been fortunate, as you alluded to have worked for IBM for 17 years of my career. And what that opened my eyes to was very early innovation, possibly sometimes too early for the market. But there are just so many things that we can do that can make people's lives more satisfying, more inclusive, more democratized. And using technology for good, for inclusion, is something that gets me out of bed in the morning. And I think fintech and fintech challenging the very traditional financial establishments is the sort of current experience I've got of how to use tech for good.
I'm interested you say that some of the things IBM was trying to do were too early. And innovation is clearly a very complex, somewhat random process. It's not something which can be designed and delivered as a package. What have you learned? So you look back at your time at IBM and then at Starling, what have you learned about how innovation actually is made to happen and then gets diffused, if you like, through an economy?
It's a really interesting question. And I think you're absolutely right. Innovation isn't something you sit down and just do. Innovation to me is when you truly listen to your consumers, when you listen and you observe the challenges and the problems that people are having, and you use the very best of the technology that's available to you or the very brightest brains that are available to you to try and tackle some of those issues. When I say that IBM was ahead of its time, I would reference things like the telematics. We're in the insurance world now, where a black box for drivers is not that uncommon, but we were talking about it 20 years ago. It was something that was being developed, it was being tested, it was being trialed with some insurance companies, but the market wasn't quite ready for it. And I'd possibly say the same about speech to text. Again, which, we did a lot of voice recognition, again, back 15, 20 years ago. Whereas now I certainly expect to be able to dictate to my phone. I expect to be able to have my voice translated into text. So I think, things that often start in the innovation labs, and possibly I can like it maybe to the Formula One industry. They will trial products in Formula One that may or may not make it to the wider world. They may or may not make it to your car and my car, into the mass markets. But they will do an awful lot of testing around those circuits, and the best products that solve the bigger problems will be the ones that come through to the market. And I think, when I talk about innovation, as I said, I don't think it can be something you sit down one afternoon and decide you're going to innovate. I think you'd have writer's block. But it's when you truly put your consumers and your customers at the heart. And that's certainly something that I would say both IBM used to do and certainly Starling used to do, as the two employers that you've referred to, and also being really open to constant change. Back in the day, people would say IBM stood for I'd been moved. IBM was about change. It was about adaptation. And that's why it's a 100-year-old plus technology company, because it's adapted and changed. And the same goes for new companies today. So the disruptors, the challenger banks, the moment they went into live production, they were effectively legacy. And the most important thing that they had to do was have a culture of constant change. And that was certainly something that we did at Starling, was constantly changed. The fact that we would put out releases 20 or so a day was unheard of in the traditional financial sort of financial sort of services industry. So I think it's being really acutely listening to what you hear and the challenges people are facing, getting and having the opportunity to work with some of the brightest people. And I certainly have had that in my career in almost everywhere that I've worked. I've been hugely privileged, and constantly disrupting and challenging yourself and being open to change. That for me is it applies to big, it applies to small.
Now, listening to and observing your customers being open to constant change, you've described what IBM and Starling Bank had in common. What was different about them? What could Starling teach IBM, and what could IBM teach Starling if we use them as vectors for startups versus established companies?
Well, they weren't actually that different, and I think that might surprise you. So people would see IBM as a large corporate conglomerate, but IBM's culture was very much about change and adaptation. It was about small teams being focused on consumer problems. Now, their consumers were more businesses, whereas Starling was more a B2C business, whereas IBM was a B2B business. So slightly different consumers with different problems. Nonetheless, it was constantly about listening to people. I mean, yes, it would be fair to say that in an organization like IBM, you would have hit some bureaucracy. In fact, the policies and procedures and the processes were actually super efficient, and things that you learnt to really appreciate. They were super slick, and you could connect across the world and across global teams. And that organization was doing that a long time ago. I think keeping teams small, being open to moving people around, being agile. And as I said, it comes down to breaking down silos. So looking at IBM and Starling from the outside, you'd most probably think that that they were very different, but actually it's about culture and about the way that people work together in an organization. And my personal experience, actually they had more in common than you might think. I haven't worked in a traditional financial institution. And maybe your question, if I had, my answer might have been a little bit different. But I can't answer it with that sort of hat on, because I don't have that experience.
Now, there was one very big difference between IBM and Starling when it started, which is that IBM is a very big global company and Starling was a relatively small startup bank. So starting a company, a fintech, is one thing, scaling it is another. And even if we take into account the fact that there's digital technology, these can scale very, very quickly. What's your thinking about how more of the startups you're hosting now in Wales, how can more of the members of FinTech Wales scale their businesses? What's the secret?
What's the secret? Gosh, if I actually had the answer to that, I most probably wouldn't be sitting here talking to you. I would have built many things, scaled them, and I'd be off somewhere else. I think for me, the secret is making sure you understand the why of your organization. What is it that you are designing? What is it you are delivering? Why will someone engage with your product? When you can then make that product beautifully designed, easy to interact with, using modern technology, then you have the opportunity of, really addressing your consumer, and so that constant ability to change. Scaling an organization is about making sure you know who your audience is, communicating to your audience, constantly communicating, getting the feedback from them, adapting your product, and having technology that allows you to scale very, very quickly. I mean, Starling, as I'm sure you're aware, was one of the first banks to be built natively in the cloud that allowed the scale to build as the consumers came on board. But as I said, being very clear about your product, constantly focused and listening to your consumers, I think is the success. I mean, Starling set out to create a modern way of banking, a way that customers could manage their money. It was very simple. And I think it's fair to say that 7 years later, Starling has just turned to a unicorn, and it's been very successful. At the heart of it, it was about consumers managing their money with modern technology.
Can we talk a bit about Wales? And what I mean by that is you've described very eloquently that it's about having an idea, about listening to your customers, about continuing to listen to them as you scale. But it's not, building a successful business isn't just about finance and having a good idea and listening to your customers. It has to be rooted inside an ecosystem, doesn't it? A successful manufacturing, service, trading economy. And if we're talking about building a regional financial services industry in Wales, it has to be a Welsh economy, if you like, a Welsh ecosystem, which is behind the success of a fintech. Now, how can fintechs capitalize on that ecosystem? How can they make contact with it? How can they become part of it?
Well, one of the things that's happened recently, as I'm sure you're aware, and many people who are listening to this are aware, is that there has been a UK strategic review on fintech in the UK, which was led by a gentleman called Khalifa. And one of the things that Ron alluded to were the components that were observed as being important to creating those successful clusters, ecosystems, whichever we want to talk to them about. His review was rooted in data that was collected from across the UK. And one of the observations was that a good cluster, a good ecosystem, had three key components: successful anchor financial institutions, three or more highly sort of rated and very successful universities, academic institutions. And the third component was a community hub or space where those could actually network together with the fintechs and the startups in the same locality ecosystem. So one of the things that the Khalifa Report did for South Wales was identified it as an emerging cluster. So from the early days in the early 90s, when Admiral set up in South Wales, in Cardiff, they started to create an ecosystem around them. And we've already seen some great businesses that have spun off of Admiral, be it Confused or Go Compare, and that comparison marketplace and the expertise that we have here specifically in Wales. So that was the component, if you like, that the report, based on the data, would say that Wales didn't actively have. Lots was happening. We are a small principality, we're a small nation, and lots of people know each other, and people are very supportive, welcoming, and very happy to help individuals. So a lot of that was happening very naturally, but by creating an actual sort of cluster and a community, I believe it will be able to enhance that even more. So I'm very proud to be launching in Wales, in Cardiff, the FinTech Wales Foundry, which will be a hub. It will be an ecosystem. Its objectives will be to bring the large financial institutions, the smaller fintechs, the academics, and actually much wider than that, really throwing our door open to the utility companies, to other, sort of energy providers, to really look at what can we do in this market, which, again, if I go back to what Ron says, one of the things, and just to quote him from his report, he said, fintech is not niche. within the financial services, nor is it a subsector. It's a permanent technology revolution that is changing the way we do finance. Its essence is both in the fast-growing fintechs and in the investment of technology used by the incumbent financial institutions. So what we are aiming to do here in Wales is to launch a foundry that will bring all of those together, that will encourage collaboration, will be welcoming to all and any of the innovators or the established players that fundamentally want to improve their product offering for their customer base. So bringing their consumers absolutely to the heart of what they're doing and delivering products that their consumers want to see. And we're very excited about that. And we will partner with technology companies as well as financial institutions. This isn't about one person being able to do anything. I think for me, the word in all of this is collaboration. As we go into the world beyond just open data into open finance, and beyond that, and you know, I know yourself, Dominic, you're very interested in digital identity. I don't profess to be as knowledgeable on that subject as you are, but you know, these are all of the things that we have to take into account if we're going to provide products that serve the consumers in a timely, safe, and relevant manner for them.
Now, Sarah, is Ron Khalifa right? Is Wales an emergent cluster? The fact you're setting up this foundry indicates you believe there is work to be done to make the ecosystem more collaborative and work together more closely to feed off each other. Do you think you'll know when you've reached the point at which the financial services industry in Wales is, I made this word up, it's self-galvanizing?
Well, maybe it's when the foundry closes because we're no longer needed. It's a really difficult question to answer, Dominic, in all fairness. I think by launching the foundry, what we will be doing is opening our doors wider than just Wales. I think what has happened in Wales has happened very organically and has happened very naturally, and there is a very collegiate and supportive way of working in Wales. But what the Khalifa Report has done, what Ron has done for Wales, is sort of lifted the lid on a secret that we've had for quite a while. And that is that we're very good at building fintechs and financial services solutions. So he's sort of in Wales, that Wales and the Welsh valleys have been generating these things for 20 odd years. You know, they've been starting businesses, they've been scaling businesses. We've seen many of the businesses go on to sell people from around the globe. So by creating the foundry, what we're aiming to do is actually create Wales as the #1 hub to come and start your fintech, to scale your fintech. You know, we really are looking for people to come and scale in Wales. And by really galvanizing that collaboration, we do believe we can make a significant difference to that. Something that's most probably naturally been happening, but just by that, by opening the doors a bit wider and showing the rest of the UK and the rest of the globe just what we have here, because we do have amazing universities. I'm sure you'll come on to those shortly. You know, we've got Cardiff University, Swansea University, Bangor University, Aberystwyth University. They are producing some high talent. They are focused on innovation. They are, you know, generating the next generation of businesses and innovators. And what we want to do here is make the Principality of Wales the place they want to stay, you know, and also to give those people that are already living in Wales, born in Wales, native to the country, we want to give them the career opportunities that they previously might have felt they had to go further afield to find. So yeah, we're really proud about what we're doing here, and I think what we're going to do is galvanise it. And one of the things that Wales needs to do is it needs to be prouder, needs to shout louder about what we've done, and what we can still, you know, the future of what we can still do.
We've talked a lot about startups coming to Wales, growing in Wales, but you also want to attract established financial institutions as well. You referred to the fact this is not a sort of one-off fintech revolution and then a normality will take over. It's actually a permanent revolution, a permanent period of change. Do you think that established financial institutions that come to Wales have to be prepared to revolutionise themselves, be part of this permanent revolution? Can they learn from it, or do you think they can come here and to Wales and carry on as they are? What type of financial institution is going to thrive in your environment? Established ones, I mean.
Well, let's hope all of them. Because if I go back to my point, for any business to succeed and for any business to grow, they have to be constantly changing and adapting. I think what we have seen in Wales is we have seen the two pioneering challenger banks both move to Wales. They've established a good foothold here in Wales. And actually, they're doing some amazing, interesting work here in Wales. They're looking at AI, they're looking at fraud, they're looking at fraud detection. They're really looking at how they can work with the universities, because we are so close to the academic institutions, and we have not only the academics, but I mean, let's face it, Wales is a beautiful place to live and work. We have mountains, sea, and plenty of other things, not to mention great sports facilities and great sporting teams. But we are seeing established new players investing in Wales, investing in their staff and investing in new ways of doing business. So I think it's always very difficult to say exactly what or who will best work in this, or will best thrive in Wales. But everybody is welcome, and everyone is welcome to play a part and join in.
Now, you've explained you haven't worked in an old-fashioned bank, but you have worked in a startup bank, and you've seen these two challenger banks succeed in Wales. Do you ever think that the banking industry needs in some way to bifurcate, and there's a utility function to it, the money transmission side, if you like, the payments side, and then there's all the interesting things you can do with the data, which is thrown off by the core business, and that's what that is the interesting value-added scalable side of the business. Do you think it's as clear as that we could actually say, well, actually, this is like an energy company. Its job is to deliver safe, secure money transmission. What we really want to bring here are really creative, inventive, data-driven fintech companies, banks like Starling in a way.
As you said, I haven't worked in the financial institutions, but the one thing I would say is I wouldn't, they're not stupid. They know what they need to do to survive, and they also know what they're very good at. And some of them might want to be a utility provider, to your point, actually providing, the very established, very secure pipes and plumbing that feed apps at the front. And we've seen that in fintechs. We've seen many fintech apps using and embracing open banking, open APIs, and connecting to back-end systems that might have more regulation to them, allowing consumers, especially in personal financial management tools, allowing their customers to pull information from several places and put it into a format that helps them to manage their money. And the difference, I suppose, with when we allude to people like Starling and Monzo, they are fully regulated banks. So they are not the app on the front of the pipes and plumbing. They've built the pipes and plumbing themselves, and they have very secure and efficient pipes and plumbing. So I'm sure there will be some financial institutions that may think, we don't want to get into that front end app development, and we're very happy looking at the sort of maybe the sort of less traditional consumer facing solution. But I think this revolution has started. I think it's got a little way to play yet. As I alluded to, we've started with open banking. We've started with the open APIs. I don't think we're anywhere near sort of established in that. I think, you know, we've generated the smartphone. Smartphone came out in what, 2010? It took many years before all of the apps were the sort of ones that you and I now won't necessarily leave home without. So I think, you know, the financial world is a little bit like the introduction of the smartphone. The apps have got to work themselves out, and the actual cloud providers, the tech providers, the plumbing providers behind have also got to establish their places. Some will want more of that pie than others. It'll be interesting to see what happens.
You mentioned the universities and how close they are to the work that you're doing. Now, are Welsh universities producing the right things? Are they producing the right sort of graduates? Are they spinning out startups from academic work? Are they working with enough companies within your ecosystem, or is there more work to do on those fronts?
I'd never say that a job is done. But that said, I would not criticise the universities from what I have seen here in Wales. We have a very successful fintech that back in the summer pivoted their business to being sort of a remote and cashless payments in Yoello. That was actually a business that was conceived at Cardiff University. It's a Cardiff graduate that has gone on to develop that business, and we've seen them win prize after prize after prize. You know, we've also seen Cardiff University working very closely with one of our fintechs here, ActiveQuote. They actually took the data and did some through the data science lab within Cardiff. They actually improved the processes and reduced costs at ActiveQuote by about something like 30%. So this working together is something that we have done here for some time. We do have a focus on fintech and fintech innovation at Cardiff, and that's doing a great job. And we also have this sort of collaboration between the universities and the businesses here, where they will take graduates and actually partner with businesses, and the graduates get experience around the around the business community. So again, to enhance and to try and retain those talented graduates here in Wales, both the business and university communities work very, very closely together. And I could go on. I mean, you know, I'm really excited about the partnerships that we have here. Swansea University, I know, are working with another financial institution to look at behavioural science and data and financial product use and how that will be developed. So I'm really excited that there is a great partnership, but a job is never done, in my humble opinion. There's always more that can be done. So, you know, we're keen to be part of that ecosystem and to encourage even more of it.
You said you could go on. One thing you could have mentioned is the data accelerator at Cardiff University. Now, you have referred to data a number of times during this conversation, and I'm intrigued by which you see as more important. Is it digital technology or is it data? By which I mean, as more and more data is digitized, you can do more and more interesting things with it using the digital technology. So if you stare into your Welsh crystal ball and try to decide where this Welsh financial services ecosystem is what it's evolving into, I suppose is a better way of putting it. But looking ahead, which is going to prove to be the decisive ingredient? Is it going to be the technology, or is it going to be the data?
I don't think you can have one without the other. That's most probably not what you wanted me to say, but I think, you know, we have to have new and improved and efficient digital processes, but through digital processes and pipes needs to flow the food and the information. So I think, you know, the two will come hand in hand, and the winners out of these will be the people who do invest in their processes, you know, that real efficiency, but also make sure that they are looking at what is happening, when it is happening, with whom it is happening, in order to make sure that they develop their products correctly. So for me, I think it is hand in hand, but you can't have one without the other.
Just one final question. Would that be your advice to fintechs? It's about being observant. Yes?
I think unless you understand your market, your consumer, you won't know what to develop and deliver to them next. So it's listening, it's being observant, it's studying the data. There were some really interesting observations this time last year. So we're Easter 2021. This time last year, when the pandemic was in its infancy, we saw some 6 million people in the UK download their banking app for the very first time. What we've seen over the 12 months of the pandemic is digital adoption absolutely mushrooming and being adopted by more people. I don't think we're going to go backwards on that. So organizations, businesses, academia, the next generation of founders and inventors have the opportunity now to really build on that digital acceptance and ensure that they can adapt their products, making sure that they are safe, making sure that they are beautifully designed, they're easy to interact with. Then I think we've got a great opportunity to really improve the ease of the consumer's life, and also to make that much more inclusive. We do need to recognize that there are some people who don't have bank accounts. We need to make it easier for them to get bank accounts. We have to recognize that there are some people, because of thin credit files and the historic way that credit has been sort of calculated and risk has been looked at, that some people are excluded from some financial products. And I think we've got to do an awful lot more to make sure that there is more wider acceptance and inclusion for people. We've seen in South Wales, we've seen democratization of some of the wealth management products that previously were just open to the wealthy and the few. So I think there's some really exciting things that we can do. But for me, you asked me right at the beginning, what gets me out of bed? It's using innovation for good. It's making a difference. And for me, where we can be more inclusive and where we can include more democratization of those products and availability to more people, then that will make me firstly a happy person, but secondly an amazingly motivated person to continue doing what I believe we're just really sort of starting to do here, which is to get the ecosystem to collaborate for good.
Sarah Williams-Gardner, thank you very much.